Of all the unique and interesting houses in the United States, the Crescent in Valdosta, Georgia truly is one of a kind. With 13 columns supporting a semicircular portico, octagonal rooms, and the fact that it was built after the plantation era, this is one of the more interesting mansions we've ever visited. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. In 1849, William Stanley West was born in a modest farming family in Marion County, Georgia. The Civil War broke out in his teenage years, and like so many Southern boys of his generation, William grew up in the long shadow of Reconstruction, watching his region scramble to rebuild itself from the ruins. As a young man, William worked at his uncle's sawmill, an early apprenticeship in the longleaf pine economy that was just then beginning to define the future of the Wiregrass region. The pine forest stretched in every direction, vast and seemingly endless, and the men who knew how to cut them and ship them and turn them into lumber and turpentine were about to become very rich. In his late 20s, already old by the standards of his time to be starting on such a thing, he made his way to Macon and enrolled at Mercer University. He paid his own way through, working when he had to, and emerged from Mercer ready to take the Georgia bar. He passed it, moved to Valdosta, and started practicing as a lawyer. Now, Valdosta in the 1880s was a town on the make. The Atlantic and Gulf Railroad had pushed through in the 1860s, and the surrounding pine forests were drawing capital and ambition from across the South. William saw his opportunity and took it. While he kept his law practice running, he began to acquire timber tracts, first in South Georgia, and then across the state line into North Florida. By the 1890s, he owned and operated a sawmill and lumber yard down in Inverness, Florida, and he began to build a fortune that placed him among the wealthiest men in the region. Along the way, in 1888, he married Ora Lee Cranford, a young woman from one of Valdosta's well-established families. In 1892, William ran for and won the election to the Georgia House of Representatives, beginning a career in state government that would stretch across more than a dozen years. Now, the story of his mansion begins a few years later in 1895 when he purchased a generous corner lot on Valdosta's North Patterson Street. By January 1896, the Valdosta Times was reporting that Colonel West intended to build a residence on the property at an estimated cost of $10,000. By the time construction actually began in 1897, that figure had grown to $17,000, which was a princely sum for the era and a clear signal that the house was going to be something extraordinary. For his architects, William chose the Atlanta firm of Bleckley and Tyler. To do the actual hands-on work of building the house, William hired a remarkable craftsman named John Nelson Deming. Born in Nova Scotia, Deming had apprenticed as a ship carpenter in Amherst before emigrating to the American South. Deming's ship carpentry training showed in the precision and patience of his work, and he would go on to build and remodel many of the great houses up and down North Patterson Street over the following decades. Construction stretched from 1898 into 1900. The result was a 23-room neoclassical mansion that was one of the largest and most stylistically ambitious houses ever built in Georgia. 13 monumental Ionic columns carry the roof of the portico, and by long-standing local tradition, the columns honor the original 13 American colonies. The interior is organized around a spacious central stair and entry hall, an arrangement that gracefully reconciles the formal symmetry of the classical revival with the freer, more open spatial planning that was beginning to come into fashion at the turn of the 20th century. The downstairs rooms mix polygonal and rectangular spaces and connect through wide doorways that let a guest move easily between rooms on the night of a great party. Detailing is elaborate throughout. Ionic columns and pilasters appear indoors as well as out. Walls carry paneled wainscoting. Cornices and door and window lintels are dentiled in the same classical vocabulary used outside. Selected ceilings are beamed and paneled in hard pine, while elsewhere, walls and ceilings are finished in smooth plaster. No two fireplaces in the Crescent are alike. Every mantel is different in design, although they share a family resemblance, each one framed by a mirrored overmantel and faced with exposed glazed fire bricks. All of them are carved from the same knot-free hard pine that William hauled up from Inverness. The dining room stands apart from the rest of the house, paneled in rare and beautiful curly pine. William had originally intended to use much more curly pine throughout the house, but a fire at the sawmill destroyed most of his stockpile shortly before construction began, and the dining room is what remains of that grander vision. The crown jewel of the interior and the room that turned the house into a regional legend is on the third floor. There, beneath the eaves and reached by the grand main staircase, stretches an enormous ballroom. An immense fireplace anchored by a neoclassical mantel dominates the north wall of the ballroom. Behind the formal public rooms, the back of the house is frankly utilitarian. A one-story L holds the kitchen, a bathroom, and storage spaces. A three-story stair tower rises between the kitchen and the back wall of the main house, providing service access to the upper floors so the domestic staff could move throughout the building without crossing the public rooms. The Crescent's place in the history of Georgia architecture is hard to overstate. Three-story houses of 20 to 30 rooms are genuinely rare in the state, and houses combining that scale with the kind of stylish design and elaborately ornamented detail seen at the Crescent are rarer still. William Stanley West returned to Valdosta from Washington in the late autumn of 1914, ill and exhausted by the demands of his short Senate term, passing away at the Crescent. The Crescent subsequently passed out of the West family, and by the 1930s, the great house had been carved up into apartments. The years of the Great Depression and the Second World War were unkind to the property, and by the late 1940s, the mansion was in serious disrepair. In 1951, it was slated for outright demolition to clear the lot for an automobile facility. That demolition never came. The Garden Club of Valdosta, founded back in 1915, organized a desperate campaign to save the house, led principally by three remarkable women named Mrs. T.H. Smith Sr., Mrs. Leonard Mederer, and Mrs. R.B. Whitehead. They raised the money to purchase the property, and then they reorganized themselves the following year as the Garden Center, a federation of local clubs incorporated for the express purpose of restoring and maintaining the house. The restoration that followed was long and patient, stretching across more than 3 decades, and in May 1954, the Garden Club of Georgia recognized the effort with its Trophy for Outstanding Achievement. The Crescent was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1980, and the long-disused third-floor ballroom was finally restored to its original glory that same year. The grounds gradually grew into a complex, with a separate auditorium added in 1957, the original washhouse converted in 1977 into a small chapel, and a round wooden kindergarten building dating from around 1900 moved onto the property in 1986. Today, the Crescent is owned and operated by the Garden Center, and it stands open to the public for weekday tours. The Crescent endures as one of the great houses of the American South, a place where the wealth of the longleaf pine forest was translated into something genuinely beautiful. That it survived it all is a small miracle of community effort, the work of garden club women who refused to let a parking lot replace a piece of their city's history. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What did you think about the Crescent? Let me know down below in the comments section, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.